Okay, now can the world hear me? I'm still claiming, yeah, I still have 10 seconds, so we're good. 1:30 start time. Thank you for coming. Sorry about the confusion of whether we would or wouldn't be able to be here and how we could vote, but we're here and we have a quorum. And we will do introductions. Jason?
Jason Dosh, Town of Palmer Lake.
Aaron Busto, Federal Highways.
Kristen Kenyon, Federal Transit.
Kathleen Collins, CDOT.
Shane Ferguson, CDOT.
Roy Cheney, City of Manitou Springs.
Karen?
Karen Birchfield, City of Manitou Springs. I'm no longer a representative or alternate.
But you're still going to sit here and you may say something, so you might as well introduce yourself.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Anton Ramage, El Paso County.
Aaron Horstmeyer, Schriever Air Force Base.
Sally Riley, Woodland Park.
John Lusatos, PPACG.
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Brandy Williams, City of Fountain. And then we'll start with Jessica.
Jessica Beckle, PPACG.
William Mast, PPACG.
Catherine Linder, PPACG.
My name is Gary Barber. I'm working on a rail project downtown.
Jason O'Brien, PPACG.
Mark Northwood, PPACG.
Casey Partridge, PPACG.
Welcome. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? First of all, do we have any changes, Catherine? Okay. Now can I get a motion?
So moved.
Oh, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Who do we have on the phone? First of all, can you hear me on the phone?
Hi, phone people, are you there? Okay.
And Junior Rodriguez, CDOT on the line. We can barely hear anything.
That's what I was afraid of. Do we think that's
This is Wendy.
better, Jessica?
Can you guys hear now?
Can you hear anything now?
Oh, it's better. This is Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Yeah, the voices in the background are very faint. This is Rick from Fort Carson.
Anybody got any brilliant ideas?
Well, speak up.
Okay, we'll try to talk really loud wherever this comes into the microphone and out into the room. Okay, well, you're off the hook for a while. Right now we're just going to approve the agenda. So can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone in the audience want to speak on public comment? Okay. Any comments on the minutes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? John?
So at the Board of Directors meeting on February 12th, we had a couple of items of interest for you all here. As an information item, we talked about the UPWP and the contracts. This will still go through 2 more times through the process. And then we're still waiting to see if we have some final numbers. I'm looking at Catherine for those of you on the phone. If we get some final numbers from CDOT, they might not be consecutive months. We might do the information item going around once, and then the actual adoption, we might hold off a month just to make sure that we have the correct planning numbers for the UPWP. In addition, we also had a great presentation from Jason O'Brien on safety and sort of a regional bent on it. We had a couple of action items from the board moving forward on that. They wanted to see if we could grab some Park County numbers, and then they were also agreeable to having this sort of a quarterly thing, so Jason's securing some other speakers to come. I think there might have been other sort of a few clarifications on some data, but those were the sort of follow-up items from us, but very well received all the way around. And we also had a brief discussion on the specialized transportation service coordination from Andy. That will have an actual item on our agenda here shortly as information, so I won't go into too much detail. And, of course, Brandy gave the TAC update, and that's the transportation-related items from the Board of Directors meeting.
Any questions for John? Okay, action items. Item 6A, fiscal year 2019-2022, TIP amendment number 13. Catherine?
Good afternoon. Catherine Runger, Senior Transportation Planner, PPACG. This item is for a two TIP amendment request that we have to our current federal fiscal year 2019 through 2022 TIP. We have received one from the Colorado Department of Transportation and three from Colorado Springs and Mountain Metro Transit. So the one from CDOT is to request to update the numbers for the I-25 and State Highway 21 or Powers Boulevard Stormwater Basin. They have some updated numbers for that project, and so they wanted to request to update the TIP to reflect those new numbers. These are state water quality funds that they'll be adding to that to improve that area that's for the interchange that's being not created but constructed by private funding with Copper Ridge. The other items you see, the next three items are all related. Their request to update project the costs stay the same, but the update is to move the CMAQ money into one project, Route 12. Stop funds between. Make sure I get this right. All the CMAQ funds would go to Route 8, which is ready to obligate before June of 2020, while money that goes out of the other two projects, Route 12 and 30th Street, would get either SDP Metro or TAP funds that would come out of the Route 8. So no funds, additional funds are being created here or being added. It's just swapping funds so that our CMAQ money will be spent on time and will not disappear, because we have been told that now that we are in attainment, we can no longer receive CMAQ funds, and we just want to make sure we spend the ones that we're still eligible for in this federal fiscal year. And so that's what this swap does, is make sure that the CMAQ money goes to a project that will spend those funds on time and then replace it with other funds that they can spend in the coming months as well. And with that, I can take any questions.
Questions for Catherine?
I'd like to recommend approval, TIP Amendment 13.
I have a question before we move on, if nobody else is going to ask. I'm just kind of curious how we know that all of the swapping that is happening here makes all the projects eligible for the type of funding we're putting back in. How do we know that?
Each of the projects has, like Route 8 is getting more CMAQ money, so it was already eligible for CMAQ money. Additionally, the other ones were eligible. They have funds that were eligible as well, for instance, the TAP. So we made sure that each of the projects was eligible for each of the types of funding.
So, but there's nothing in the packet that gives me enough information to know that. Because each of these projects went through a competitive process to have the funding awarded to it, and they were awarded points, and projects were awarded based on their attributes for different colors of money and different processes. So now we're taking all of that work that was done and we're putting it aside, and we're making things work so that the money works, but that doesn't necessarily make the project the right project to do that with. Are all aspects of the project that this funding is being spent on now eligible for this to happen? I mean, this is an FHWA question that we get all the time from the financial office in Denver, from Andre and his group, about how we're spending money on different aspects of a project and how they know each piece is eligible. So I was asked to ask that question, so I'm asking that question.
Aaron, do you want to weigh in?
So as all the eyeballs turn to me, that is a very good question. This was just brought to my attention 13 minutes ago. You're right, there's not a ton of information on the projects. I guess I don't know what different pieces are involved in all of the projects, but we can look more into this. I just don't know enough, honestly, right now to make a very good comment.
John?
So, Wendy, this is John. And Catherine, we'll maybe look at one of each at a time. So the original one for the first one, MMT Route 8, had CMAQ and TAP before, and it has CMAQ and TAP after. So it both are eligible. If it fit the eligibility before, it fits it after. If we move on to the next one, which is
Can I
Route
ask
12.
you a question on that, John?
Sure.
So because the CMAQ is now 535, does that mean the TAP funds are being returned?
The TAP funds are being moved to another project. So we're just swapping the colors of money to make sure that we obligate all our funds before they go away. So the total project amount for each project stays the same.
Right, but I get that for CMAQ that there's requirements, but if there's TAP funds, isn't that a different process? I mean, CMAQ has the most stringent, but with the TAP, I mean, could any of us do that? Could any of us give back parts and pieces? And
All three of these projects already had CMAQ dollars programmed to them. So all we're doing is taking CMAQ from the other two,
consolidating,
putting it into one project so it can be spent by June 30th of 2020.
and then
So we don't lose it.
reducing the TAP monies, and then putting those into other projects.
Can you switch to the next one now? So, and again, you can see that again you have in the third one. So, Wendy, to answer your question, the reason how do we know that these projects are eligible for these fund sources is
It's not so much the project itself as when the projects were awarded, there were different attributes that were called out that made them eligible in those categories. As we're moving things around, I just want to make sure that we're not doing some type of a capacity project or spending CMAQ money or TAP money doing asphalt, and that's my concern. And that's what was brought to my attention today after this packet got looked at. So I was asked to ask that question. So I just want to be sure that we have all our I's dotted and T's crossed, and that I understand what I need to do, because in the end, I'm the person that needs to move all this money.
right. Well, as far as the dotting of the i's and the crossing of the t's, all three of these projects were eligible for these fund sources in the before situation. They are eligible for these types of fund sources in the after situation. All we're doing is adjusting the amounts. The fund sources themselves remain the same. We're just adjusting the amounts. And the reason for adjusting the amounts is to make sure that now that we're in attainment, the CMAQ money gets obligated on a project that's ready to go now versus sitting on a project that is not necessarily going to meet the timelines. So as far as how do we know because if the person would look at the different fund sources, they are included on each one of the different ones in the before and the after situation. So that means all we've done.
The projects have already had this type of funding put in. You're just changing the amounts now.
Exactly.
That's what you're telling me, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So then I have a question. Again, there's only one person really who, for the most part, gets the CMAQ, and that's Mountain Metro. But if there's other different colors of money, is there a way to trade those around? Like, could Victoria and I just start trading money? I want to make sure that it's an equal playing field and no one thinks that something different's happening because it's Colorado Springs, Colorado Springs.
And that's a fair question. And I think we've done this in the past where, again, as long as the project totals have stayed the same, not only have we moved colors of money, but we've also switched years. So I think we're being very consistent with what we've done in the past, and especially when we're talking about making sure that we deliver the program in a timely fashion. There are going to be times when we're going to have a project that's fallen behind schedule that gets moved back in the TIP, and then a project that's ready to go gets moved forward in the TIP. Those sorts of things are not the quote-unquote, the project's been canceled, the money goes back into the pot, and everybody has free shot at it. These are more, I don't want to call them administrative, but for lack of a better term, they pretty much are. They're making sure we're matching projects to schedule and deadlines for those obligations. So at no time did any of these projects gain more money. If they were gaining money, we would need to put the money back into the pot. We'd send an email to you all saying the funds are available. You would all have the opportunity to apply for them, and we would go through that process. That is not this particular case, and in fact, we have done it in the past where we've even switched years. So we're being consistent.
So just, and this isn't a direct apples to apples, but just last month, the city of Colorado Springs swapped money with the town of Monument so that they could advance one of their projects. So we do work. We have done it. There's precedence of.
So if this is all getting done at the same time, this is all $2020. Why are you going through the exercise to swap all the funds if the timing has to stay the same?
Well,
I don't understand, and then I don't understand.
Well, the timing is important because we need to have our projects under bid by June of 2020, right? And understanding the CMAQ is under the same rules, but this makes it more cleaner too. Whenever the CMAQ contract and processing all the funds are under one project with Mountain Metro. Also, when you look at the CMAQ monies that went to 30th Street, they were leftover funds from another project where we were where we put the CMAQ, and the roundabout project fit the CMAQ requirements for emission benefits. But it makes more sense for this to be tapped into the Mountain Metro project, just to have all the CMAQ under that one contract. It's in front of all the other projects, and it makes it more seamless.
Is there more work required if you have CMAQ funds?
Well, there's the air quality benefits of showing that whenever you're in the competition for competing for the monies. I don't know if FHWA does the audit afterwards or not.
Well, yeah, you have to report to air quality benefits every year. So having one project would make it simpler because you're only reporting on that one project.
I'm just trying to translate this into something the board can understand, because it's not written in a way that's really easily digestible as to why you're doing it. I mean, yes, they're all eligible, but if they're all eligible and it's all the same time, why are you going through the exercise to do it? So I think that needs to be explained to the board, and there really needs to be some sort of narrative here to explain why you're doing what you're doing, because unless you have that, they're going to ask all the same questions, and they need to know the answers to that. So to me, it sounds like it's for reporting purposes that you want all the CMAQ in one place, so it's the easiest to
Well, that's one of the
get through.
And then, I don't know.
Go ahead.
The CMAQ money, while we've been told we have the June of 2020 deadline, but we've also been told that we have some flexibility there, and that's like STP, Metro, and TAP funding. The CMAQ money is the one we are most worried about, and that's the one we want to make sure we actually get spent in the year that we have allocated, because after this state fiscal year, which ends the end of June, we don't believe that CMAQ money will be there. Is that correct, John? That is what my understanding was of why we wanted to get CMAQ out before STP, Metro, or TAP, is because that was the priority and most likely to be taken in quotes from us or to disappear.
Right, yes. So basically the CMAQ money, when you're in attainment, you're not eligible to spend it. So therefore, we have money that we can still utilize up till sort of the end of the fiscal year, the grace period sort of thing, which is why we're trying to do it. I think another thing to realize is by moving this all over to the project that is easily obligated, we are mitigating risks, because as Catherine has said, if we spread it over 3 projects, that means if any one of those 3 projects aren't able to obligate, and they don't, then you've lost the money. So this is our way of mitigating the risks, making sure that all of those CMAQ funds get used while they're available to us.
Yes, some sort of paragraph that explains that would be very helpful, probably for the board. And the CAC.
The CAC agenda went out, but I can give it to provide them at the
Maybe
meeting.
some sort of an addendum that says, I mean, I'm getting phone calls from my council members, so I can only imagine that the CAC will probably also be told about this. So if you have any additional information to explain it, that would be helpful.
I mean, how does it give the appearance that we're trying to do a bait and switch? I mean, the project dollars are not changing. It's just the color of money.
Because there's just no explanation. And the why is the big
Well, the
thing.
explanation is we're going to lose the CMAQ money by the end of June if we don't use it quicker.
Right.
Right.
But then in my brain, you've got CMAQ funds and you've got Route 12. Are you going to build Route 12?
Or what?
Are you going to build Route 12?
That's the plan, yeah.
But
Yeah.
obviously not at the same timeline. Because again, they all have the same timeline.
Well,
They
we're
all
all
have the
programmed
same.
for 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my mind, it looks like the reason you put it all in one is because you know that project can be done. Route 12 may or may not necessarily happen. And then if Route 12.
Wouldn't happen. It's just Route 8 is ahead of everything, and it's a lot more secure in
Right.
explaining that CMAQ.
Right. That's your surest bet.
So is the analogy that if you're allowed to bet on a horse race, after it's halfway over, you would run and put all your money on the horse that's in the lead? I think that's what we're doing.
Right. And
All of the horses still may finish, but this way we're sure we've put our money on a winner and we don't lose the CMAQ.
Correct. All of that makes sense in real time having this conversation. It just wasn't really conveyed in the packet. So without this conversation, it was hard to come to that conclusion.
We take the constructive criticism well, and we will add a narrative paragraph for what goes out into the board. And when we meet with the CAC, we will take that extra information as a preemptive strike and
Right.
try to explain it before they start heading down that rabbit hole. So
Yeah, I think it just
we
helps
appreciate that.
give you the whole story. And that's what we were looking for is why. I mean, there's got to be a reason why. What is the reason why? Victoria?
I have a question for Wendy. Wendy, do you need to sit with Tim and Brian and just go through to make sure all of your Ts are crossed? Because I have no problem doing this as a conditional vote so that it can be done, but you also get the information you need.
Well, that's already happened.
I think that I can get what I need to be able to make the changes that need to happen. So as long as you're comfortable with what is going forward and the explanation today, I'm fine with it. You don't have to make an extra exception for me.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
And I'll move approval of the amendment.
Second.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? I know. I would much rather have that. Yes, Aaron?
So after all this conversation, I'll just chime in one more time to say from the federal perspective, when it comes down to project selection and the TIP, our biggest concern is usually the sub-allocation clause, which is we don't want people to be given money and then they just do whatever they want with it. So we would not see that this process is impinging on that regulation. These projects went through a process. They were all approved. Now, how you determine which one gets what money, obviously that is a conversation you need to have, but it wouldn't really rise to the level of a concern for us in that sense.
Anything else? Okay. Nope, you did not. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 6B. I could take a guess. It's Catherine. South Powers Extension Corridor Study Funding.
It's kind of me, but a lot of help from you all. Okay. So over the past few months, or even 6 months or so, There's been discussions regarding South Powers Extension from, that's where I need help. I'm not sure exactly where it goes from. But the extension south to I-25.
Mesa Ridge Parkway to I-25.
Thank you. Still learning here. And so the idea is that there would like to have a corridor study to identify the needs and the corridor that they would like, the preferred corridor that they would like in that area. And so a big piece of that would be identifying funding for that corridor study, not the construction piece yet, that's down the road, but just for the identifying for the study. And so there's been discussion of possibly using federal funding if it's available, but our current TIP policies and procedures talks about if there's funding, new funding or funding from other projects that comes back to the region, that the first priority is projects that are experiencing cost, that need cost overrun funds. And so this item is to discuss possibly allowing this project to compete with other projects that might request cost overrun funds if they become available. We don't currently have any funds identified that would be available, but it's possible in the coming months we might. And so we wanted to bring that up for discussion to talk about possibly allowing this one study to compete along with other projects.
Tom?
Thanks, Catherine. If I could just add one small thing. A action item here, voting on this as a yes, does not fund it, but rather says it can go into the pot to be considered for funding. So voting yes today does not fund anything. It merely lets this project concept be included in the discussion when we do have funding to allocate. So I just want to be clear on that. A yes today doesn't fund anything. It just allows it to be in the process.
Tim?
Would it not have been allowed in the process before because it's not already in the TIP?
That is correct.
Is the City of Fountain council member concerned about that not following the process?
Aren't we in the process right now?
I don't know.
We're following the process all the way around.
Okay.
My middle name is process. Everything is good. The last item is good. This item is good. Let's not.
Okay.
Let's not go down that road.
All right.
We're good.
All right.
Right. If it's in the process, there should be no worries, Tim.
Well, this is circumventing a process that's established.
No,
it's not.
We're putting it in the process.
All right.
Never say that I'm circumventing a process in front of FTA and FHWA.
Right.
No.
Right.
Agreed.
No,
We have in there that this is
the process.
we are following the process, and step one of the process is requesting the waiver, and that's what this is doing. Okay. And look, so at the end of the day, what they sort of grade us on is if you have a process and do you follow it. And they don't care if your process says when you vote on things you have to wear a silly hat. You know, if that's your process, though, and we don't wear the silly hat, they will ding me for not wearing the silly hat. That being said, you have rules. You adopted those rules. You have to follow them. But in those rules are the ability to change them because you're your own rules. If you go and you try to change a federal rule, like the sub-allocation, that's when they'll slap your hands and say, that's not a rule you can monkey with. This is a rule that is your own rule, and you can waiver and you can change it, and this is all part of the process to make sure that every project in every jurisdiction is treated fairly. Maybe the silly hat was a bad analogy.
Sally?
So I understand the importance of this planning process, and it was actually brought up maybe about 6 months ago in our access meetings with CDOT. I'm just curious why it was not part of the call for projects when we began the TIP process.
So again, this is as far as what it would have been eligible for the call for projects would have been new funding 3 years from now, 4 years from now?
Well,
23 and 24. This is a need that has been identified as current, which means it would need to use current funds, which means the current funds, by rule, go to projects that are already in the TIP and underway as a first tranche, and then would move on to then other sort of priorities. So the question in front of us today is, do we want this project to happen 4 years from now? And I think the answer is no. Or is it a project that we want to consider today? And if it is a project we want to consider today, the rules need to be set aside and have this one be given a waiver to be considered.
Does that make sense?
So again, I just want to ask, is it something that El Paso County or Fountain or the jurisdiction just wasn't on their radar, and therefore wasn't part of a previous TIP process?
Victoria?
So we've been planning this section for over 50 years. And it just hasn't risen to the need at the time. It's been in PPACG's plans, it's been in Fountain's plan, it's been out in El Paso County's plan. What we found is that there are two particular very large parcels who are looking to go through the development process sooner rather than later. And we are struggling a little bit to maintain the planning that happened 50 years ago. And we don't want to miss out on this opportunity now, because it literally will, if it goes through as some people would like to see it, it will negate the future function of this road. And so it has become a very high pressure and something that we want to do. We also have been chatting amongst all of the region about how we can maybe fund this. And we may have some funding that we can turn back that would have to be used by that 2020 deadline. We will certainly put it through that competitive process, and we don't believe, in talking with our major partners, we don't believe anybody else has a project that is underfunded. And so I think even if we didn't go through this, we would probably be able to compete during that cost overrun process, but we wanted to bring it forward sooner rather than later. And we've had a couple conversations about how this might work, and we have a couple options. But again, we wanted to make sure that we were being upfront and transparent and bring this to you now before we have the funding solutions solidified. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for that.
Anytime.
Any other comments or questions, concerns? We are in the process. We are following our process. We just have lots of them.
And I will highlight, too, that this is a one-time waiver for this one project. We're not looking to make this a brand-new policy for everything going forward.
Okay, with that, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any more comments? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item 6C. CDOT project development list updates. Catherine, and I'm guessing you're going to have a little help, but go
Yes,
ahead.
I'm actually just going to hand it over to
Oh,
Shane,
okay.
so I don't have to talk. Thank you.
No problem. So before you, I don't believe it went out in the packet, but we have printouts handed out here. We've got two lists. They're basically so if you guys remember, we went through an exercise, I believe in September, October this past year, identifying and prioritizing some major capital projects through CDOT that we wanted to help get funded through the Senate Bill 267 general fund transfer. And the larger of the two lists that I have before you, the top four projects were identified and ranked and are being funded through that 267. So State Highway 21 and Research Interchange, safety improvement projects of I-25 and 94, the ramp metering project, and Fillmore to the Garden of Gods Auxiliary Lanes project. The remaining two that were identified through this body was Airport and 21, and then East, US 24 East widening. So this next exercise that we're asking to consider is, as we plan out our 5 to 10-year pipeline of projects, we want to identify, and we're constrained to about $160 million for this part of the region, what to consider as your top priorities if over the next 5 to 10 years for CDOT facility investment. And so we figured that we would carry forward the airport and Powers interchange, as well as the US 24 East widening. And then talking within the region, looking at considering where these projects are located, where they're being constructed, where we have a lot of our infrastructure needs. Some of the next items to consider is, as everyone is very well aware of, I-25. The I-25 corridor currently has an EA that was completed in, forgive me, I believe that was 2007. And in that EA, from basically south Circle, just north of Circle through Briargate, a fourth lane was identified in that EA as an HOV lane. And so right now, what I'm showing here is maybe as pursuing that first phase or that first section of that HOV lane, which would be basically Cimarron to North Nevada, trying to identify where the current transit stations are within Colorado Springs, maybe capitalizing on potentially a bus route through I-25. And then the last one on this list is US 24 West over Ridge Road. As many of you are familiar with, just the location of Red Rocks just south of 24, community north. There's a lot of definitely traffic and individuals and pedestrian movement wanting to get to that park. And so US 24 West has an EA as well that we would want to start to working towards and completing, and that was identified, or we identified that as potentially a fourth project on this list. Keep in mind, we are constrained by the $160 million total allocation or total budget. Below, in the gray area, we've identified additional needs through the corridor or throughout their community, Powers projects, as well as I-25, 67, and 24 as well. This is for your consideration, and I'm open for questions and additional comments. John.
Madam Chair, if I might. Well, two things. First, permission to treat the witness as a hostile witness. First thing, Shane, I think is important, because I did have a lot of people chat with me about this, is to clarify the Ridge and 24, that it's not just a pedestrian walkway, but rather it's grade separating the two different roads, so it's not just a pedestrian project, it is a bicycle project, a roadway project.
That is correct. And so I think some of the initial descriptions for that project itself was a US 24 pedestrian crossing. And that was, unfortunately, just kind of some miscommunication as we were putting these lists together in a very short timeline. This project actually is US 24 over Ridge Road. Ridge Road would accommodate bicycle, pedestrian, as well as facilities underneath US 24. And so the cost is obviously, in order to make that overpass, and we would have to go out, I believe it's 1,600 feet either direction on 24 to help gently break that grade up for that overpass. Again, this was identified in the EA as one of the projects, major projects on that corridor.
So, and then I had a statement, but I thought I heard somebody, does someone have a question for Shane on the Ridge before I, go ahead. Mm-hmm. I thought it's okay, Madam Chair. Sorry.
So help me understand why an overpass is needed at this point as opposed to a traffic signal or some other mechanism to manage traffic and pedestrians?
Yeah, so that would have to go back into the study itself, and I'm not as familiar with the history of how that study was put together, but in the study itself, it does not identify this intersection as being a interchange, ramps, et cetera, or a at grade. Rather, it is identified as an overpass to accommodate Ridge Road under 24.
But why wouldn't a signal serve the purpose?
Again, I need to go back and look how that study was put together and identified.
Is it safe to say that the overall concept for 24 was to be access controlled, and some of them are going to be access controlled by ramps, others are going to be completely no access?
That is correct. I mean, for a portion of it, absolutely.
So I think it's that sort of thing where we see people go down 24 and it takes you, I don't want to say hours, because that would belittle other things that have happened traffic-wise around here. But it takes you a long time to sort of navigate stopping at every light. So this is the concept is to have more free flow. Whether or not that is true or not, I am not an engineer, haven't played one on TV, didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, I can't say. But I think that's the overall concept is by not having a signal, you're not stopping traffic, and it can continue on to be stopped at the next light.
Yep, thank you.
The next comment, if I'm not stealing too much of everyone's time, is not a question for Shane, but more of a comment. And Kathleen, if you might need to help me on this, but we want everyone to sort of know that why this all came back, because when you look at it, the funded part of the list isn't changing. It's more of the things that are on the unfunded list. So my first reaction was, why are we bothering to do this? Because can't we just let the first part of the list go because the bottom part is unfunded, and then address it, next time we do this, in a year from now or whenever that is? And the response I was given, because I was not at the Central Front Range TPR meeting that I believe was held, Catherine went for me, was it January 6th? January 6th. But at that meeting, you got to see all of the different plans sort of stitched together. And then at the STAC meeting last week, I got to see all of, again, now the whole state sort of stitched together. And it's sort of like when you read a story and you can tell when somebody has sort of stepped in and written one of the chapters, right? If you look at the whole statewide sort of plan, there's this sort of tapestry or story that's being told of what the needs are. And one of the things that sort of stuck out was the absence of I-25 on this plan. And so that's one of the main reasons why we wanted to come back and say, yes, even though it's on the unfunded list, it's important that it's on the unfunded list to sort of tell that statewide story. Because when you're talking to the legislators and you're saying, hey, we need more money for transportation, and you've got a lot of the other parts around the state having, and again, help me, Kathleen, it's like 70 is the east-west and 25 is the north-south. And you see all of the different regions, the TPRs, the 15 TPRs around the state having those projects. We are noticeably absent by not having that sort of on our list. So we wanted to go back and look at that and sort of plant the flag as, yes, not only is it important statewide, but it's important to us to help tell that story. Is that an accurate way of sort of repeating what I've heard?
I would say so, and I believe it's the South Central meeting that was held on January 6th, and then I believe that Central Front Range is this coming Monday.
Okay.
And then Southeast is this coming Wednesday.
South
But
Central
yes,
sounds
I
like
think
a tough region, doesn't it?
we want to make sure the legislature knows that what we have in mind when additional money comes and how we would go about spending it. So, yes, your description covers what I understand as well.
So I just wanted to make sure that people sort of, so for you to really take a look at this list and decide, yeah, are we okay with it or not, I think that was some valuable background information to help you sort of digest why we're here again so soon after we had just done this exercise. Hopefully that's helpful.
And Kathleen, remind me, the transit dollars are separate, right, from the 165, or Shane? So they're not taking away from the projects that would be in the 165.
The transit is 10% of the 10% of the pot is what I understand of it, but I would need to actually investigate that further. I apologize.
That is correct, and so you'll see as a second list the identified transit projects, and this has been working with Brian and Craig and City of Colorado Springs to help identify what these projects would be. One project of note is Brian, and I think you and I have talked about this one, is the mobility hub on exit 128. And I think if there are any questions there, I'm going to look to Brian just a little bit on some of the answers on some of the other projects on this list. But the mobility hub is something that was requested by CDOT to help include on the transit list. And so for the transit list, we're looking at about just under 18 million is what's identified for this area, in addition to the 160 million that's for the capital projects.
Tim?
Shane, and you may not know this or have the answer right now, but the EA that was done for completed for I-25 in 2007, did that also include like auxiliary lanes from ramp to ramp, between each ramp?
Great question. Some locations, I believe, yes. For instance, I'll show you back on this 267 location, our projects, Fillmore to Garden Guides. That's where we're definitely accommodating that. So as far as the other locations, I need to take a look.
So that's one that's on my mind.
Yeah, and so if you look at the price tag on a few of these, so for instance, this Phase 1, that $55 million does not include Fillmore to the Gardening Cots because it's already incorporated based off of 267. So.
Any other questions for Shane? So sorry, Catherine?
Just want to make one additional comment, that there's also there might be other projects that you don't see higher on the list that might be funded using other funds like HSIP or FASTER. And so there are other funds available as well. These are the ones that don't have identified funds available.
And that's a great point. I think on the previous list, for instance, Judge Orr Road in 24 was on the list, but we're pursuing faster safety to accommodate modifications at that intersection.
Karen?
I just wanted to clarify, did these all come from our long-range transportation plan?
Would you like to answer that, Shane?
I believe this was been in the past identified as corridors within long-range transportation plan, and it has now been requested that we specify very specific projects. And so in the past, we've identified the EA of 24 East, or I'm sorry, 24 West, or I-25 EA planning documents. And so now the request has been drill it down into very specific projects that you would like to see on your lists.
Victoria?
Thank you.
Are we in a time crunch that we have to vote on this today? Because I'm a little uncomfortable not having it shared this with my management, since we didn't get the list before. Sorry, I'm not picking on you.
No, that's a great question.
Right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my understanding of the timeline is, I believe May. John, is that correct? Is that your understanding, May or June?
Last time I checked, I didn't work for CDOT. I don't know what you guys do.
I know.
No, I believe it is May. At the STAC meeting, the comment was something along the lines, when they talked about this, was that it's going to go to the Transportation Commission, I think, today as a draft, and then it's going to take a couple of months to go through the process. So we certainly bring it back next month. And again, I hate to sound kind of weird about it, but this is the unfunded list, right? So
Correct.
Anything that comes up, we're still cool because we've got our funded list. If it takes us a little extra time to have our unfunded list because we want to make sure that we've vetted it as a process, well, that's just time we're going to have to take. So I see no reason we can't bring this back next month, even if it doesn't sort of fit in nicely with the CDOT timeframes. No offense, Kathleen, because I know you're the one that ends up having to put that packet together.
Well, actually, the timeframe for CDOT's adoption is June with the TC when they clear the statewide plan. So I think there is time for you guys to revisit this list.
Plenty of time.
I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I would echo that, and because I'm unfamiliar with most of these projects, it would be nice to actually have Google Earth up or something to be able to have a description of CDOT's priorities.
Victoria?
Sorry, one more question.
They are refining the list as we speak, and of course, we want your input. And also, eventually, there are plans in place to even outline a story for each of the 150 projects that would be on this unfunded list, just so people know what we're talking about. So that's in the works right now, and we are still refining the list, although we'd like to get it cleared up as soon as we possibly could.
Victoria?
So just so I'm clear when I go back, we really want to look at the middle spot and say, these are the right projects, or we'd like to see this project swapped. So that's only determining that and no other priorities on anything below.
Correct. And so, again, the top section is identified, already been funded for 267. The middle section would be considered a 5 to 10 year pipeline of projects. And then what we provided below is additional projects to consider if you'd rather, as a body, swap out into that middle 5 to 10 year section.
Brian?
I'd like to add, since we're going to be looking at this again next month, to maybe have the transit project list mirror the highway one. So, a block at the top that's highlighted that shows which ones were funded through years 1 through 4. And then, the 5 through 10 projects listed, and then the unfunded, the really unfunded ones down the list.
Great point. We'll go ahead and make those corrections.
Okay. All right. And I'd also just like to mention that, if you all remember, we've had a highway development program for many years. And then prior to the 2018 fall election, when there were 2 ballot measures, that's when we started to develop a transit development program. So all the projects that were already funded or put in years 1 through 4 that the TC approved in December, I believe. And then this second list of projects from years 5 through 10 came from that big list of the transit development program. So it's a really long list, but this list kind of really pares it down well to what can be understood. So it's not anything that we haven't seen before.
So I have a question, Shane. Let's pretend it's 10 years from now and you've built PPACG priority number 8. What is that overpass at US 24 West going to look like?